Mouth bass.
Ooh. Now it's back to bass. Look at that big old chunk.
Pounds there.
There we go.
Okay, the double. Wow. Big girl for the box.
Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here. And today I'm out here at Mickey Grove Park. I got my kids out playing in the park today. And I just got back from the International Sportsman Expo. And I was going to do another elaborate, episode with pros. And there's a lot of those to come this season. But one of the big things that I thought I should address today is a lot of people don't understand elements and conditions and how to properly target fish around those and how to locate them around those certain conditions and what elements are dominant versus others that are not dominant that day. A lot of people try to balance the sun, the moon, the current, the tides, the water conditions, the temp, all together at once, and obviously end up ignoring some of the most dominant elements that are taking place that day. So what I'm going to do is break down the sun, the moon, water temperatures, the time of year, and the time of day, so hopefully you can better perfect your targeting of any particular species that you sought after that day. So let's get started. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to be jumping back and forth probably between a lot of these key subjects, need to be the sun, the moon, or whatever, but let's get started off with the sun. And let's talk about the sun's intensity. For time of year, in the winter the sun's not very intense. Even today, bright, sunny out here, we probably have a UV index of 3. And the UV index is the ultraviolet radiation index from the sun. What that does is it penetrates in the water. So a lot of the time, it warms the bottom, that radiation warms the bottom. And it also penetrates down deeper and silhouettes items. So in the winter, we have to think how that's gonna work to our advantage. In the spring, in the summer, maybe as a disadvantage. So one thing you wanna look at, when you have a clear sunny day with a high ultraviolet index, and when I say high, I'm talking probably anything over 6, you wanna start looking for your fish. If they're structure and cover oriented fish, they're gonna be extremely tight to cover or down in those bushes. If they're offshore species like trout or striper, that aren't really holding to that cover or structure with that higher ultraviolet index, they're gonna start moving down a lot deeper to avoid that sun penetration. And that's in the summer where you're gonna get that higher ultraviolet index. In the winter time, a lot of the time we're gonna find our fish shallow or near rock because the sun intensity is not that much. Even though it's clear, the intensity is not that brutal. So they could still be relatively close to the top and still in shallow water. What you wanna do is figure out the temperature at that point, because the temperature of the water becomes more important than the actual ultraviolet index. Dependent on the time of year. For the winter, the temperature is more important. So the sun intensity is crucial. Now, when the sun gets blocked out, when we have overcast days, that often triggers feeding. An overcast day comes, we're talking prefrontal, just before an overcast day comes, is always really good. That day before, in the winter time, you have to take into consideration these fish aren't eating as much. So that could be a key window. As the first signs of overcast comes, this fish can start actively feeding. In the summer, it could be the day before, the day of, and the day after. The water's warmer, they have higher metabolisms going, so they're eating a lot more. So you have to keep that in mind. And so post-frontal, right after that front moves in and leaves, that tail end is your post-front. A lot of the time, finding fish and triggering fish at that time is much more difficult. A lot of the time, if they're structure and cover oriented fish, they're gonna pull in, they don't wanna feed, they're gonna sit there and rest, they gorge themselves just before then, and you're gonna have a tough time finding them. The same thing happens with those offshore species. A lot of the time, they're really not gonna be going, and you have to trigger them into striking. So those post-frontal times, a lot of the times you have to slow down, use smaller baits, or try to get them to react. So you have to keep that in mind. In the summer, that window is gonna be a little bit longer, a little wider open for you. In the winter, it's gonna be more narrowed. And a lot of people say, well, you can't catch as many good fish in the winter. Well, sure you can, because that narrow window, you could have a phenomenal day that time, but you can also strike out the day after. We just had a video shoot about a day ago, and we were out top lining for rainbows. I knew it was gonna be extremely tough coming into it. I told the guys we were going out with, realistically, if we put 5 fish in the boat, I'll be impressed, because it was post-frontal, and we just had that rain. We had a clear, sunny sky right after that, and the wind died. Slick calm, post-frontal, a lot of sun. The fish are really not wanting to go. So first thing we did in the morning, we had a little bit of chop on the water, a little bit of wind going. So what we did is we actually trolled the opposite direction because the active fish are facing into the wind, and it was post-frontal, so more than likely they just ate. So our mindset behind there was a reaction strike. We're gonna bring those baits from behind them and in front of them. We ended up hooking about 4 or 5 fish, but realistically, none of them actually got into the boat because they were barely tapping. We got a little bit of hook on them. So probably the best thing we could have done to key in on those strikes that we figured out a little bit later is downsizing to where they really couldn't miss. So that's just a couple things to get started off right there with. And if I think about more things in the sun, we're gonna come back to it, but let's switch over to the moon. All right, so moon phases. I'm sure you've heard of moon phases or guys talking about fishing the moon phase. Well, how is that important? When do you want to pay attention to it? And when do you want to ignore it? Well, we have the new moon, which is the black moon. You practically no moon, you don't see it at all. That's your new moon. We all know what a full moon is. It's that big, perfect, round moon that we see in the sky. Well, moon phases are the particular phase that that moon's going through, whether it's half black, half lit up. That's your moon phase. So the new moon is when you first get it, and that's black. Your full moon's at the end of the phase. Where I pay attention to the moon phase is if I have steady conditions around it. If the weather looks all the same, I look at my forecast, each night looks about the same temperature, each day the wind's about the same, the lighting's about the same, so the sun is not really the dominant element, the weather's not really the dominant element, so everything's been virtually the same. The fish can eat all throughout the day, so now the moon phase is going to play a role into me figuring it out. So when I say new moon, what does that mean to me? Well, it's black, so at nighttime it's not lighting up anything. So at nighttime the lights are off for them. There's no feeding going on unless they feel it and it's close to them, but there's not as much hunting. They'll grab something if it gets close and they can feel it, but they're not actually looking at it. So with the new moon, the bite first thing in the morning tends to be a lot better. The reason for that is they've been hungry all night, and hey, now the lights are on. It's time to go. Let's actively feed on them. So a lot of the time, first thing in the morning, that new moon bite is going to be really good for you. No, I'm not telling you to go out there and not fish in the evening. All I'm saying in the evening is those fish might have actively fed more in the morning, and maybe you need to slow down. Maybe you need to try reaction strikes in the evening. Maybe you need to try to give them something so encourageable or fish slower right on top of their head, shake a drop shot if you're fishing for bass, or if you're fishing for trout, make multiple passes to your same area and do a reaction strike, come from behind them, troll against the wind instead of in it, so they don't get a good look at your bait, maybe they'll react to it. Now with the full moon, now you should actually know right now, the full moon, more than likely they're gonna be actively feeding more towards the evening all throughout the night. So the morning after the full moon, the bite tends to be a little bit less. Now you could say, well, what about those times in between, Nick? So when I look at my moon phase chart and I'm looking at it, if I see an 80% moon is 80% full. I'm gonna start paying attention right around 80 to 85% full, and I'm gonna treat it like a new moon. So that's how I'm gonna plan my day around it if I have those steady weather conditions and I don't have fronts or anything like that. The same thing with the new moon. If I see a 10 to 15% moon, I'm gonna plan around and treat it like it's a new moon. So if you keep that in mind, it's gonna help you target. If you know it's first thing in the morning, after a new moon, you got that first light, you could fish a little bit bigger bait, you could fish a little bit faster, the fish should be more actively feeding for you at that time. The same thing with the full moon, you know that morning after, they might not be actively feeding. You might want to slow down and try reaction strikes or shake a little tiny worm in front of them to get them to go at that time.
Hang with us, guys. We'll be right back. Attention Northern California anglers, have you been to Boat Country in Escalon? With one of the largest selections of welded aluminum fishing boats from Weldcraft, Lowe, and Hughescraft, chances are they've got the right fishing boat for you. And did I mention they have a full service center to take care of all your boating, repair, and maintenance needs? If you're a boat owner or just looking to become one, you owe it to yourself to check these guys out. Visit BoatCountryUSA.com or stop on by. I'll see you there. Did you know that P-Line makes specialized lines for all your fishing needs, from the super strong abrasive resistant CXX or the low stretch super stealthy CX Premium, or maybe you're looking for invisibility or super bite detection with P-Line's 100% fluorocarbon. No matter what your needs, P-Line's got it covered. To find out more, visit P-Line.com.
P-Line, baby.
Ever tried pulling a planer board next to your boat when trolling or fishing from a swift current bank? If not, you're missing out on one of the most phenomenal fish catching machines on the market today. With Yellowbird planer boards pulling your lines perpendicular to your boat, you can't help but catch more fish. Find out more by visiting www.yellowbirdproducts.com. Have you been to rustylures.com? Did you know they offer free shipping on anything over $29.99? And with all the latest and greatest in bass fishing gear, from punching tackle, umbrella rigs, swim baits, and you name it, there's really no reason for you not to be getting the best deal online today. So go to www.rustylures.com. Did you ever wish for an RC boat when you were a kid? And do you have a passion for fishing? Well, guess what? It's time to do them both at the same time. With RCFishingWorld.com's RC Fishing Pole, it's time to be a kid again. So visit www.rcfishingworld.com today. Did you know that Bass Angler Magazine has more articles than any other bass fishing publication? And with the top pros from around the nation spilling the beans in every issue, there's really no reason for you not to be subscribed to the most informative bass fishing magazine there is, Bass Angler Magazine. Thanks for watching. Now let's get back to the show.
Now, along with that moon phase, a lot of people end up going into the winter and they're fishing for sunfish. The sunfish family, bass, bluegill, things of that sort. Those guys are affected by colder water temperatures. And a lot of the time in the winter, or those colder times of year when that water temperature's down, a new moon, okay, it's a black night, so that water's gonna cool off even more. It's gonna be dark. First thing in the morning, it's gonna be cold. Okay, a lot of the time, the new moon in the winter or those colder seasons is really not how you wanna target your bass. The moon phase doesn't play as much of a role in the colder season as it does the warmer season when you find those steady conditions. Because realistically, it's cold in the morning, that affects those fish. Certain fish like trout, it doesn't bother at all in the colder seasons, and you really want to focus more on your moon phase at that point. But always keep it in mind, it's not really a dominant element unless you have steady weather conditions, and then you see that full moon or you see that new moon, and then it can become a dominant element. So now let's talk a little bit about tide and current. Well, in lakes you clearly don't have a tide, okay? In rivers, big river systems that connect to the bays and ocean, you do have tides. Tidal systems, it's a must that you pay attention to the tide. You want that faster moving water. If you don't have that faster moving water or those short tides to where the water's really not ripping, you really have to slow down in tidal systems. If that water's ripping, it's going to position those fish a little tighter to the bank, tighter to structure and cover, and you can target them a lot better. That's why out in the California Delta, you see me fishing there a lot of the time. When that tide's moving fast, I'll start flipping and pitching to those targets where I know they're going to be positioned on, because there's going to be a lot of bait being pushed up to the bank, flowing around them. Now let's say in a little pond like this, you clearly don't have tide, and there's really no wind going today, so how can we find current? Well, you could have a dam, you could have little artificial water, little waterfalls, things like this. You see this little ripple right here coming off this little tiny thing in this man-made pond? That's the only current that they have going in this pond. So clearly, there is going to be some fish right around here. It's creating a little bit of oxygen for them. It's giving them a little bit of current. It's going to attract bait fish and attract more fish to that. So if you have an option and the day gets tough, a lot of the time searching out current is going to help you on those tougher days. So let's talk about the sky. Let's talk about the forecast. Let's say I'm going to go fishing out on my favorite lake, and I look at the forecast and I see that I'm going out on Wednesday and I see there's a storm coming on Thursday. Now, what's my perspective here? A lot of the time the barometer is going to fluctuate. We're going to get a low pressure system moving in. That's going to encourage those fish to strike. That's prefrontal, just before that storm, right at the beginning of that storm. A lot of the time that's going to trigger those inactive fish to eat right then. So my thought process of picking a lure at that time is, I want something a little bigger in profile. I want to appeal to a little bit bigger fish. I want something I can move a little bit faster if it's a warmer time of year. If it's warm, I want to fish a little bit faster because it's that perfect bite window, and I can present my bait to a lot bigger fish, more active fish who are willing to come get it. If it's the winter time and it's prefrontal, I'm still going to fish a little bit slower, but I might go with a bigger bait, like a big swim bait or a bigger jig at that time. So a lot of the time when you get that gray sky, those fish are going to move up, those fish are going to be active. When you get that clear sky, those fish are going to move down and either be active down deeper or inactive if it's post front right after that frontal system, because that barometer is going to go back up. It's going to put pressure on those fish they just ate. Now you're going to have to do reaction strikes if you're bass fishing, crankbaits, things like that. If you're going to be hopping a jig, fish the opposite direction of the wind, fish a spinner bait, rip it off and bump it into cover, things like that. If you're going for trout, you can speed troll, go a little bit faster, go against the wind. Don't give them a clear look. So that's how I try to treat the sky. If you have that steady weather, start ignoring that forecast and start looking at your moon phases. Know that you can look at your moon phase. If you see that your moon's 50%, you have to ignore it. Now at that point, what are you going to do? You're going to start searching out, you're going to time your tides if you're on a river system or a tidal system like the Delta. If you're on a lake and it's steady weather, you don't have any dominant moon, now what are you going to do? Well, first thing I would do is start looking out for, little natural dams, currents, waterfalls. If not, I know I'm going to have to fish deadly slow to try to trigger fish into striking. The conditions are so spread out, they could feed in the middle of the night, they can feed in the middle of the day. More than likely, there's no storm on the front. I mean, we looked at it, it's a clear forecast. We don't have any dominant elements going. Maybe the sun's a dominant element to push them down, but a lot of the time when we have that and we have no clear thing showing us the fish are going to be active, we got to slow down. We got to drag baits. We don't have any wind. We're going to use something very subtle and natural. When you get wind, it disguises your baits. You can fish a lot bigger bait, and they're more willing to come get it. They don't get as good of a look. It breaks up that light. So keep that in mind. All right, now let's talk a little bit about water clarity. This is something I often witness and see a mistake, and it's one of the most dominant conditions in all of fishing. When we have dingy, dirty water, I'm talking, I put my hand under, I can't see it but a foot or two away. And I still see guys fishing very subtle, quiet baits. If you have a subtle, quiet bait, it needs to move a lot. It needs to displace a lot of water so those fish can see it in that dirty, dingy water, or you need rattles. This is where your solid colors start coming into play. White always plays a factor right here. Very few guys have white baits. I do. White is the only color that reflects ultraviolet light. So in real dingy, dirty water, they don't see white, they see a silhouette of your bait. So you got to try that in dirtier water. What dirty water offers is it allows you to be closer to your target. You don't have to be as stealthy in dirty water. The fish don't see you from as far. So if you're bass fishing, you can get in a little bit closer and make better casts to your target. Got that dirty water, get in there and pick it apart a little bit better. A lot of the time you miss the fish by this far, he's not going to come get it, you have to hit him. So if you're further off your target and you're not as making accurate casts, your casts are a little bit looser, you're missing your target by that much, that might not trigger that fish. You may have been just outside his strike zone. Now the same thing applies in clean water. You get out to some of these lakes here in Northern California, it's gin clear. Now if your boat's too close, they feel the pressure of that boat. They see that boat. They see the splash. A rattle can be too much. A big bright or solid color can be too much. This is where you want to start venturing into your cleaner colors. Something a little bit more stealthy. If it's not windy, they got a perfect look at it. You might have to start fishing plastics at that point. So what you really want to do is focus, on that cleaner water. On that cleaner water, you have to move off. You got to make further casts. Accuracy is not as important. They can see your bait come out here. They'll come find it. If they see your bait from a long range, if they got 10 foot of it, if you see 10 foot in the water, that fish can more than likely see 30 foot away. And if it's warmer and he's active, he'll come get it. If it's cold water, you want to shrink that strike zone and go as a little bit more accurate to try to get in there and trigger those fish in the colder water that don't want to travel. But when it comes to clarity, you need to pay close attention to where your boat position is, getting accuracy in your casts on those dirty water days. Same thing happens on those cleaner water days. Get away from there. You can make a little bit looser casts, but if it's cold, you got to get away on that clear water, and you have to make accurate casts. So this is why a lot of time people are like, in the winter on those clear bodies of water, I just can't get bit. Well, the fish aren't eating as much. They're not as active. You got to make accurate casts. Their strike zone's small, and you got to stay away from the fish. So you got to stay completely focused and know you have to be perfect to get those bites. They're not going to come do it for you like they do in the spring a lot of the time with those fish. So you got to make that judgment call, know where to position your boat, know how to cast, know how accurate you have to be, and know how far you got to be off on those cleaner days. So keep that in mind. So let's talk a little bit more about time of year. Now, you can pay attention to all those elements that I just mentioned to you, but if you ignore the time of year, you're ignoring the plant die-off, you're ignoring the type of bait fish that are actively thriving throughout warmer conditions. The bait fish are dying in colder conditions. So you always have to pay attention to the time of year. Oh, I just had a little one tag me right there. Let's see if he comes and gets it. But you know, here's the thing. You look around me right here. You see this Tules, the bulrush out here, it's all dead. When you see greenery in the water, green plant life in the water is putting off oxygen. That's gonna attract bait fish. You're gonna get those bait fish in there, those bigger fish are gonna come in there. It's gonna hold more life when you see that green plant life in the water. When you see dead plant life in the water, this stuff consumes oxygen. So your oxygen level is gonna be much lower near dead plant life, and it's gonna be much higher near that green plant life. So realize, a lot of the time in the winter, when you don't see that fish up in all that greenery, it's because it's all dying off and it's consuming oxygen. So they're gonna move out near that rock where it stays a little bit warmer. The oxygen levels are more consistent in those areas. They're gonna get out where they can find a little bit current, a little bit of rock, a little bit of deep water, a little bit of shallow water, so their trip is not very far. That's for your structure and cover oriented species. Your offshore species, that doesn't affect them too much, but what you want to pay attention to in the summer at that point is water stratification. You probably heard the term thermocline. What happens when we have steady heat in the summer, there becomes a perfect oxygen level. The die-off is down deep, bad oxygen under, too warm on top, so this oxygen level shrinks to a certain section. A lot of the time you can look on your fish finder and you'll see all the static looking stuff, that little plant life, the algae, the zooplankton. You're gonna see a certain section. You're gonna start noticing in the middle of the summer when it's consistently hot, you're gonna see a certain section on your fish finder, a certain depth where those offshore species like to actively hang. That's a thermocline. We get the same thing in the middle of the winter. So we get thermoclines in the winter, so we have our turnover in the fall and we have a turnover in the spring. When those turnover happen, that water becomes unstratified. It mixes, turns over that dead nutrients on the bottom. It mixes up. Your little tiny bait fish, your little microorganisms start eating more. They start bulking up. Everything becomes more active. So your bigger fish start triggering on those. Same thing happens in the fall when we first get that turnover. Everything's mixed up. We get a lot of feeding, a lot of active fish going off. So they bulk up for that colder season. If they're not a species that does well in the colder water, you're gonna find that you're gonna catch the tar out of them in the fall. So just in this example here, you can see that I'm really not paralleling the bank too much. I'm casting a little further off. And what I'm keeping in mind is I got a jig tight on here. It's a football head jig. So I'm paying attention to the bottom. I'm dragging it on the bottom. It's slick calm out here, all right? The sun's penetrating all the way down. So I'm just casting around for bass right now. So the bass more than likely are not going to be near this bank. There's a lot of die-off right here. There's no oxygen here for them. So what they're more than likely going to be doing is moving to a little bit deeper water. It's slick calm, so I need a natural presentation like a jig. Kind of looks like a crawfish, looks high in protein. The water right here is about 47 degrees. So I also know that I need to fish slower through the strike zone when I drag it past them. So I need something that looks realistic, something that I can move slow, something that looks like a decent sized meal so they will want to eat it for me. Otherwise I'll go extremely small, but you tend to get more smaller fish when you go too small, but you still can catch bigger ones if you keep it in front of their face long enough and trigger them into striking. But a jig appeals to a little bit better bass. Clear, calm, low oxygen, no current, a lot of die-off, so I know I'm fishing a little bit deeper, no wind. I need to fish natural. So that's what I happen to be throwing out here on the pond today. Let me get into some other tips for you here though. So let's talk a little bit more about time of year. Now I like to consider where the bait fish are and where the forage moves around in that lake according to the time of year as a condition. A lot of the time in the fall, early fall, that bait's gonna start migrating into those creeks. And a lot of people ask me, they say, why do you consider that a condition? Well, it's pretty consistent. You know, this time of year in the fall, when they're moving into the creeks, the creeks still have good oxygen level. All right, what happens is we start getting rain runoff. All right, when the rain runoff and the fertilizer from the ground, if you have more shoreline than you do water, algae starts to go in there. The shad like to go in there because algae blooms forms, and you can see that greenery in the water. Zooplankton, which is a microorganism, gets in there and starts, zooplankton, whatever you want to call it, gets in there and it starts feeding on the algae bloom. Now you're going to start seeing these color splotches in the water, these green color splotches, red color splotches. Sometimes you're just going to see that. And those shad, those minnows, they all get in there and they start gorging themselves on that. So I consider that a condition. That's that time of year, early fall, mid-fall, they come back into those creeks, they eat it all. Now it all starts to die off. We start to get later into the winter. The plants start dying off like this, they start consuming oxygen. That same bait starts moving back out towards the later fall, back out to the main lake points. So I consider that a condition. And depending on the weather, you know, if we didn't have any rain going into the fall, I wouldn't be quick to jump back into the creeks. I would fish still more out on the mouth of the creeks. Once that rain first started coming, the first couple weeks, I would start moving back into the creeks. Once I clearly noticed a lot of the greenery starting to die off, I'm going to start moving back out of the creeks. So that is a condition you have to pay attention to. And a lot of the time, if you don't have that, your bait fish is going to be smaller. The bait fish die off when that water gets cold. Threadfin shad start dying off right around 45, 46 degrees. I was just out yesterday walking around and I seen a huge school of them all dying off with white splotches on them. So you got to pay attention to that. If you see that bait fish starting to die and flutter down and lose control of its body, try to match that with your presentation. If you see active fish in there, and even if you don't, find out by trying to match that. So all of that is a condition. If you pay attention and you're fully alert of your time of year, your forecast, your moon phase, your sun, your ultraviolet index, your presentation, your water clarity. One last thing. If I'm fishing in dirty water, I got 100% fluorocarbon on here. I maybe have 2.5 foot visibility. Does the fluorocarbon offer me in the way of invisibility in here? Yeah, but it's not really that great. Fluorocarbon, low stretch, I get good bite detection. That's about the only thing it's offering me in here. Could I get away with braid in here with about this 2 foot visibility? I could probably use braid and have about the same principles that I do with fluorocarbon, very low stretch, good sensitivity. In cleaner, clear water, I would need that fluorocarbon. I don't want to alert the fish to my line. I can get away with a little bit bigger line diameter, low stretch, detect them. If I was fishing in top water, either dirty, clear, or anything, I would use monofilament or copolymer line so I can get the best of both properties. But pay attention to all those things. If I can think of anything else here, I'll make sure I slip it into the film for you. But I'm Nick the Informative Fisherman, guys. I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you picked up some cool tips for this. Check out the new website, informativefisherman.com. Get on there. Got it all organized by species for you. You can get on there, break it all down. You'll find this video on there too. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you guys watching me. Without you guys, I don't have a job. All right, you guys ready to get going? Go get something to eat? You ready?
Yes.
No.
Tell the people watching, say bye, guys. Thanks for watching.
No, I want to eat food at here.
You want to eat food here?
Yes.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.
That one, once again, tells us maybe we need to slow down. I yo-yoed him up to down.
So I decided to hit up one of my new buddies, Ishman Rowe, to see if he wanted to kill a few hours with us on the Delta this morning. We both had about 5 hours to kill, so why not hook you guys up with some good wintertime bassing tips? And with the water temperature dropping down into those upper 40s, we knew it was going to be tough, but let's hop on board anyways.